Hello everyone, this is Francesca again, and the lecture of today is about analog forestry. It's a concept that maybe is new for many of you, so we will take it step by step. So I will start with describing what ecosystem services are because they are a very fundamental concept for analog forestry. And then we will start to describe what is analog forestry and what kind of guidelines exist for its implementation. And then I will also show an example of the implementation of analog forestry in Peru. So ecosystem services can be defined in general as all those things that the environment and the ecosystem give to the rest of the world, so also to humans. And they can be classified in these four categories. So provisioning services, supporting services, cultural services, and regulating services. And provisioning services are perhaps the ones that are the easiest to understand and the most direct ones. So they include food, water, wood and fiber, for example, think of cotton, and fuel as well. And supporting services are a bit more hidden, but they are equally important. And they include nutrient cycling, soil formation, primary production, and habitat provision. So habitat provision also for other animal species, for example. And nutrient cycling as, for example, cycling of phosphorus in all the ecosystem. Then we have regulating services, and these are, for example, climate regulation, flood regulation, water purification. So think, for example, of a forest and how locally the forest can affect a microclimate, for example, by providing cooling, for example, and think of water, rivers and lakes, and how plants that are some plants that are in that water can also affect how purified that water is. Or flood regulation, so think of how certain trees or plants can help to retain a flood by offering really a physical barrier, for example, to the flood and to the water flowing. And then we have also cultural services. And these are maybe more indirect, but they are also equally important. They can be spiritual, aesthetic, educational, and recreational. So they relate to all those things that all those activities that humans can undertake in the environment and that are more related to a cultural aspect. So when we go to the forest, when we go to nature, we often have a pleasant aesthetic experience, for example, because the landscape is beautiful and because it helps us relax, for example. So cultural services also include this. And if we focus, for example, just on the soil, I took this as an example because I think it's particularly interesting. So in this picture on the slide, we have a set of really of services that the soil offers to other species and to humans as well. So again, for example, we see there on the left of this picture provision of food, fiber and fuel. This is, as I said, perhaps the most direct ones. But what about providing, for example, habitat for organisms that are very small but also very important for overall biodiversity and for the well-being of the ecosystem, for the quality of the soil? And what about, for example, offering really a physical foundation for human infrastructure? How could we have houses? How could we have bridges? How could we have all sorts of buildings if we didn't have the soil offering us this structural service to us? And also at the same time, we have, for example, constructions materials that can be got from the soil, for example sand and stones and so on. So really soil is not just what we have under our feet. It's also something that gives us a whole variety of services. There is also others in the pictures. There is climate regulation, there is carbon sequestration. It's also a very important service offered by the soil. All of these are very important, and I think this serves as a good example of maybe also many things that we don't think about when we think about the environment, but they are very important. So when we think about ecosystem services, it's important to keep in mind that they should be preserved because they are very important for human activities, and in that sense, they are very important also for businesses. For example, how could economic activities exist if there was no good air to breathe? What if there was no good water to be used? So the environment is really fundamental for humans and for human activities. And for this reason also biodiversity conservation is very important. So in a way we can conclude that we should really take care of the environment, we should really take care of the ecosystem, so we should act together with nature and not against it, as it often is. Think of, for example, pollution. Pollution is usually a very damaging activity for ecosystem services, so definitely this is good to keep in mind. And in this, starting from this context, let's move to analog forestry and how analog forestry is really one way of acting together with nature, according to the rhythms of nature, according to the patterns of nature, and not against it. We will go back to this picture again later, but let's start from it because we can see how analog forestry in a way scores and how it is positioned in respect to other types of agriculture. So the one on the left corner is monoculture. It's the one that is most often used nowadays. But in terms of biodiversity, as you can see from the graph, is the one that is lowest. So of course, when we are doing monocropping, we just have one type of plant growing in an area, and that really doesn't offer much in terms of biodiversity and in terms also of, for example, habitat to other species. On the contrary, we have the so-called climax forest. So we can say the virgin forest, the highest point of development for the forest typical of one area. Of course, what climax forest looks like will change according to the area of the world where we are. So the tropical forest is going to be different from the forest that we have in Scandinavia, but the idea is that that is the maximum level of development and also has the highest level of biodiversity. Analog forestry is just before that. So we will see now in detail what analog forestry is. So it is, in this sense, a sustainable agricultural technique. It's 100% organic and it does not include the use of external inputs. And the idea is really to look up, in a way, as a model to this climax forest and trying to replicate it. So the idea is to maintain the structure of the virgin forest and to have a variety of species living in the same area according to that structure. So we will have a series of species that are productive and that offer a lot of products throughout the year to humans. So we have, for example, we will have plants that produce food, we will have plants that produce essential oils, and so on. And analog forestry can also be defined as a process of ecological succession, which can also help to restore degraded land and also to restore eroded landscape. And in this sense, it's very important because it offers an alternative to monocultures, to monocropping. And it also does this together with the local community. So the idea is to preserve natural resources and to also increase the beauty of the area, and at the same time to produce income for the people that live in the area. The analog forestry is in a way regulated by the International Analog Forestry Network, which was created in 1996. If you want to have maybe more information on this network, you can go to the website that is in the notes. It's www.analogforestrynetwork.org, and there you will see, for example, a collection of examples from around the world. And also you can see the complete manual. We have some parts of it now later on in this presentation, but there you can really download the whole document. And the mission of this network is to promote the application and the appreciation of analog forestry techniques as a critical component of the rural development. So the view of this network is that the restoration of the planet's support systems can happen while providing also economic opportunities to the rural areas. I wanted to have a very visual example of what analog forestry is in practice. So we have on the left of this slide, on the left-hand picture, we have an example of a monoculture, of a monocropping. But then on the other side, on the right, we have an example of an integrated ecosystem. So the cultivation of bananas, for example, can happen in these two ways. We can have it as a monocropping, we have it there on the left, and we can have it as an integrated system with analog forestry, something that looks much more similar to the actual forest of that area. So as you can see, also visually, it looks completely different, and you can get an idea of how it can affect biodiversity, how it can affect the local climate, how it can affect local resources. So analog forestry is effective on two levels. It's effective both locally and globally. Locally, because it has, as we were mentioning, socioeconomic benefits for the local population. So it provides food, because we said the idea is to have more than one harvest from more than one species during the whole year. And then it also provides income, because part of this produce can also be sold, or it can be transformed to other products, and they can be sold outside the community. So we really have income for the rural community. And then also it provides biodiversity conservation locally by preserving a kind of habitat that is suitable not just for other plants, but also, for example, for other animals, other microorganisms, other insects. And as we mentioned, also when talking about ecosystem services, at the global level, analog forestry helps to preserve ecosystem services. So by preserving biodiversity locally, it really helps to preserve ecosystem services also on a more global level. So now there are, in the next slides, I've gathered some pictures from the manual that I was talking about before. And here are summarized the principles of analog forestry. You can maybe then read them in detail, but I think it's really interesting to notice this step-by-step process. that really takes into consideration what is the place where we are, what is it like, what is the current status of the place where we are planning to implement analog forestry, and how would that place look if we would have, if you remember, that climax forest in that area. So these principles include observation. So as I was saying, in what type of forest we are and what species are present already, and also to learn, to understand and learn more about the land, to know your land, and also to map, for example, water systems, and potential for reducing external inputs. And then we have this principle that I think it's very important to be guided by the landscape. So it's important to plan analog forestry so that it can really blend in with the existing landscape. And along this same line of thought, it's important to follow this ecological succession, so that we start with some plants, and then little by little more plants are added. So we have these intermediate stages until the design will lead to a climax forest. So then we have also other principles like value biodiversity and respect mature forests that are already in the area, and also very important, respond creatively. So to be prepared for the unexpected things that can happen, and ensure that we don't have just one plan but multiple pathways to the success of this analog forestry design. So this is a bit more in detail the method of the analog forestry, which is taken by the field guide to analog forestry. And the first thing that the manual suggests to do is to calculate this physiognomic formula of the native forest. And this formula describes the architecture of a mature forest, and of the site for the establishment of the analog forestry. And then this is compared with the physiognomic formula of the site in the current state. So as maybe you remember from some slides ago, we said that analog forestry can also help to restore degraded land. So perhaps in some cases, when analog forestry is implemented, the land existing on the site is not in good conditions. So we have to compare the actual current state of things with the ideal, with the climate forest. And after that, you can see the details of this physiognomic formula in the manual. There is an analysis gap that is calculated to see, in a way, what is the path that we should follow, what is the existing gap between the land we have in the current state and the climax forest. And after that, there is an ecological evaluation. So that is a technique to judge the ecological sustainability of an ecosystem. And the steps are these. So to assign a value to each of the indicators that are reported in the field guide, and to add the values together and to divide them by the number of indicators in the group, and then to add the average group numbers together and divide them by the number of groups, so that in the end we have this average ecological value of the land. From this, we move to draw a base map, so to draw the principal existing elements of the site, so what is on the landscape already. And this will allow also a more integrated vision of the land and its management, and it will also help to guide the design process. So from that, you can design a site map, and then develop a database that you can use to obtain information about which species can be used in that site. So for example, once you have all the information about the site where you want to implement analog forestry, you can access this database, and the database will tell you what kind of productive species are suitable for that particular place. Because as we said, forests look very different in different locations of the world. And in the end, you can then move to the design of a productive landscape using species which are native, so typical of that area, and maybe also by adding some exotic species that are anyway suitable for that specific location. So this was a bit to give you an overview of what the principles are and what the method is. Of course, as I said, you will find a very detailed description in the field guide. I didn't include it here because I think that it's something that becomes useful only if you actually have a place where you want to implement analog forestry. I thought it's more important to understand how it works, because I think it's such a good example of how even when producing food, you can still work with nature, you can still respect nature. I think if you reflect a bit on the principles that were included in the previous slides, this is very evident. So we don't have something that is a monocrop, we have something that is site specific for where you are. And this is the application that I wanted to present to you and discuss with you. This is a project that I've been directly involved in, and let's see now what it is about. So this project was implemented in a specific region of Peru, in Madre de Dios. You have two maps on this slide that show you where the region is located. You probably know where this region is, but you also have a very specific map that shows where the site is in respect to the interoceanic highway. So it's not far from Puerto Maldonado, and the idea of this project was to offer a very practical way to contrast the deforestation. So deforestation of the Amazon rainforest is very serious problem, and the main causes are these intensive agricultural practices, and the consequences are that there is a high loss of biodiversity, and again, as we were saying before, of ecosystem services, like for example also carbon stock. And not just that, but also the local communities, the local populations are displaced, are forced to move somewhere else. So this is what it looks like in many areas alongside to the interoceanic highway. Often those areas look like this for about 50 kilometers on maybe not 50 yet, but anyway many kilometers on each side. So the idea of the Arbio project was to contrast this phenomenon. The deforestation of the Amazon is very serious. It's going at the rate of 750,000 square kilometers, and here is a summary also of the leading causes of this phenomenon. We have, of course, mining and infrastructures, but the main problem for deforestation is agriculture. It's something that we have also mentioned in some of the previous lectures, but for example, meat production affects a lot also deforestation in these areas, either with pastures or by clearing areas to grow feeds, for example soy, ingredients for feeds, so for example soy for the animals. So these are the main causes of deforestation. And this is a serious problem because the Amazon rainforest has 25% of the planet plant and animal species, and it's a very big help for the carbon storage, so also very big help to contrast climate change. And also it offers other types of ecosystem services, so for example the regulation of water and nutrients, and also air and water purification. So we really get the idea that conserving the Amazon rainforest is a priority for preserving not only the local but the global equilibrium of the ecosystem. So the idea of Arbio was to use analog forestry in this site that I showed you before, to fight deforestation and at the same time to offer productive conservation. So in practice, Arbio acts on a land concession of about 1,600 hectares. And the idea is to work on 3 pillars. So to offer the chance for a sustainable development of the Amazon, offer the chance for a coexistence of humans and forest, and also endorse the locals. So the idea is really to involve the local communities and do something that is useful for them. This is done in different ways. So it's done there locally by testing analog forestry. And the idea is to do this in that area and also to involve the owners of the neighboring concessions. So to implement analog forestry in only one part of those hectares. And you can see also on this slide, produce products like jams and juices with local species that can also be sold somewhere else and can provide an income to the local communities. So give also the neighbors the idea that this is a model that is advantageous for both the environment and for the people, so that they can be motivated to replicate it. And there is again this action both at the local level and at the global level. So locally, as we just said, we have the implementation of the analog forestry, but this because it supports biodiversity, it supports the preservation of ecosystem services. It also has a global perspective and a very important relevance also at the global level. And here is a bit of a summary of how the project of Arbio acts on these 3 different areas, so environment, economy, and society. So, as we said, for the environment, we have the protection of the Amazon forest from the deforestation and at the same time ecosystem services preservation. And then we have on the economic side the endorsement and capacity building of small-scale producers, guaranteeing them an income from multiple sources. It's important to note that, for example, there have been workshops that have been organized not in the forest but in Puerto Maldonado, where more people could gather to show the techniques. So there is a small site there where the technique of analog forestry is shown, so that people can go there and learn. And then also there is a cooperation with Italy, where, for example, the products that you see there in the picture, these juice and these jams, have been sold through fair trade distributions. and also through the adoption of hectares of the forest. We will see a slide about it in a minute. And also at the level of society, we have the possibility for locals to make a living from their land without compromising the biodiversity. And also it helps to have this global right for having a flourishing Amazon forest, and especially for those consumers that receive these products. It also contributes to raising the awareness to where these products are coming from, why it's important to produce them in a certain way. So, for example, some studies have been done on the jams, LCA study, so a life cycle assessment study has been done with one of the jams produced by this project to compare it with jams coming, for example, from monocropping, to really show also to consumers what the advantages of this method are. This is a screenshot taken from the website of arbioperu.com. You can go and check it out if you want to learn more about the project. But just to give you an idea, basically this is a map of the area, and the area is divided into squares of 1 hectare each. And in order to offer support to the project and to have like a personal connection with the project, you can click on one of these hectares, and you can sort of adopt it by paying a certain amount per year. So you can offer support to the activities that are carried out. I think this is a good example, but definitely I will also try to provide you with some more videos, for example, dealing with other applications of analog forestry in other areas of the world. I wanted to have this example here because I've been directly involved with the project, and I think it provides a very good example also for an area that is very close to you. So I will leave you once again with some questions for you, for reflection and for discussion. So I was wondering if, for example, you are aware of other examples of analog forestry in your country, and what kind of benefits would you see for your country if this method was taken up by more producers? Do you think it would be an advantageous thing, and in which way? And what impact do you think that analog forestry would have for locals, really in your country, in your province, in, I don't know, your hometown, for example? Do you think it would provide them with good opportunities for income, for example? These are some of the elements that I think can help you to reflect on this method, and perhaps also on how it compares with other agricultural methods that you are already familiar with. It's all for this lecture, and thank you very much for listening.